Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Skip Mason,
pastor, preacher, historian, author,
teacher, librarian, archivist, world traveler,
collector, family historian, avid reader, and creator of the popular Vanishing Black Atlanta Facebook page.
But a lot of folks who love history.
Most importantly, he's our dad who loves his family and who taught us the importance of our history and having important conversations.
Join him now for this episode of Conversations with Dr. Skip.
Well, good Sunday afternoon, my brothers and sisters. I greet you in the wonderful name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I am so delighted to be back with you again for this very special conversation this afternoon as we reminisce and look back over the last 40 years, remembering the dynamic class of 1982. Some of you were at the General Conference when Bishop Marshall Gilmore, Bishop William Graves, Bishop Dotsy Isom, Bishop Otho Lakey, and Bishop Ori Broomfield were elected and consecrated to serve in 1982 in Memphis. And so today I'll sit with Bishop Gilmore and Bishop Lakey as they reflect on that time and as they reminisce not only about the period of their seeking to be elected, but since that time as well. Let me greet our Senior Bishop Lawrence Reddick and Mrs. Wendy Jones Reddick, the College of Bishops under the leadership of Bishop Sylvester Williams and Mrs. Carmen Leonard Williams. Let me greet the chairs of the CIT committee, Bishop James B. Walker, and my bishop, Bishop Thomas Lewis Brown, and Dr. Louise Baker Brown, and our General Secretary of CIT, Mrs. Teresa Duhart, Dr. Teresa Duhart, who continues to provide stellar leadership. And I'm excited that Dr. Duhart has an upcoming CTI TED Talk on Saturday, August the 27th, from 1 to 2:30, and it has a distinguished array of panelists who will be sharing and engaging in conversation and providing some support and assistance to you as we continue to maneuver and manage through technology in this period of what we call the post-pandemic. Let me also recognize the ladies of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority. When I did my recap of the General Conference just a little over a month ago, I did not have a photo, but thank you, Sister Teresa Muldrow, for sending and for sharing that particular image. We were at the General Conference on the day of the election, and a beautiful letter was read by Bishop Reddick on behalf of Bishop Marshall Gilmore. And not only was the letter read, we were also blessed to hear a prayer. I'm just going to play a little of the audio. The screen will be black for just a moment, but you'll hear just a little bit of the audio of the prayer that we heard.
As he came to me in 2014, Baltimore, Maryland. We are thankful for the 63 individuals you call to the low task of bishop. That's right. We come before your holy presence on this day.
Well, without a doubt, those of you who were there know that that prayer shifted the atmosphere. And I am so blessed that that prayer has been shared. It blessed me so that I reached out to Sister Joan Gilmore Oglesby and just inquired what her dad would do with the prayer after he finished. And she said, oh, he'd probably throw it in the trash. I said, please if he considers, would he send the prayer to me? And so I received the handwritten manuscript of that majestic prayer from Bishop Gilmore. And it is something that I will forever treasure. I'm looking for it now. I'll probably put it back in my vault, in my safe, because I don't want to lose it. But I'm so grateful to have that prayer, and it blessed us tremendously. A couple of days ago, on Friday to be exact, I sat down with Bishop Lakey and Bishop Gilmore in advance of today's show, which is being pre-recorded. It is pre-recorded. And so I want you to listen and enjoy this great conversation with these two great iconic Episcopal leaders, the 41st and the 44th bishop of our church, two men that we love and absolutely adore. And so I encourage you today to enjoy this conversation with Bishop Lakey and Bishop Gilmore, the class of 1982. Well, what a joy and an honor and a privilege, really, it is to sit with the 41st and 44th Bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Marshall Gilmore and Bishop Otho Lakey. We're going to spend some time today, hopefully more so my listening, as they talk about 40 years ago, actually 40 plus years ago, and their road to being elected an Episcopal leader, a bishop in the class of 1882. Bishop Lakey and Bishop Gilmore, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm so delighted to have both of you here with me. And before we begin, let me offer my regards to Mrs. Yvonne Gilmore and Dr. Elfrida Lakey as well. And let me thank my dear friend and sister, Joan, for her technical assistance and for making sure that Bishop Gilmore is on and creating that wonderful backdrop. But there's a backstory to that backdrop, but we won't discuss that. But before we begin, Bishop Lakey, you were called out of retirement, if you will, as if you were ever really retired, because you're always writing. And your wife tells me, your wife tells me you stay up late at night. But you were called out of retirement to go back to your home district, the 4th Episcopal District, to assist Bishop C. James King. Tell us about that experience, if you would. I'd like to start there.
Well, it was an exciting experience, really. Bishop Gilmore's, he'd been called out of retirement a couple of times, and this was my only experience. And it was really a new experience because I'd been retired for 11 years. And so it was almost getting back on the bicycle again after a long time not doing it, trying to steer the wheels and all. And it was an exciting experience. And then to go back to Louisiana, Mississippi and Louisiana, as you know, I pastored in Louisiana for 3 years, and in Narcissus, my first wife was born in Mississippi. So it was like going back home, but I had never been the bishop there. And as the saying goes, though, the foundations that really were still in place were laid by Bishop Marshall Gilmore. For the 4th district was his initial Episcopal assignment. So I had a lot of reminiscing, as people would often call his name, say Bishop Gilmore ordained me, and Bishop Gilmore appointed me. So it was a wonderful experience. And also I had an opportunity then to come to the General Conference, more or less in charge of a delegation, which was a new experience also. So I thoroughly enjoyed being back in the harness for a while to see the church anew from a retired point of view, and really to see how much the church has changed, while at the same time seeing how much it had remained the same.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And Bishop Gilmore, Bishop Lakey referenced your having been called out of retirement a couple of times. So what do you feel when you think you're about to sail on and enjoy the sunset and the church calls you back into active duty, Bishop Gilmore? What is that like for you, or what was it like for you?
Well, the first time I was called out, I was asked to go back to the district from which I was elected and which I served under Bishop Lakey. See, I went back to Dayton for, I think, a month after I electionated to, and served Phillips Temple Church for that month, and he was my bishop. And it was just good getting back and seeing the people. That time I was only there for, I think, 5 months. And it was a good experience. The last time was the 7th district, which is my home district. I never passed in this district. When we were seniors in seminary, Bishop Bell, who was W.Y. Bell, was my bishop, and he contacted me and told me, he said, now, your presiding elder wants you to preach and teach, but I don't want you to do that. And I don't have an appointment that I think will provide you the income that would allow you only to pastor. So I'm going to go to Knoxville, Tennessee. That was in January of 1961 for the College of Bishops meeting. And I will find you a bishop. And he did. And he notified me later that Bishop J. Claude Allen would provide for me in Chicago. Bishop Lakey was called by Bishop Allen because I didn't know Bishop Allen. Bishop Lakey knew him, but I did not know him. And Bishop Bell made it possible for me to not come back and have to teach and preach. But it was a good experience. But what I found out then, well, that was 8 years after I had retired. And it was different because I knew nothing about this district, knew nothing about the preachers. But they were all very kind and accepting. And I tried to carry out Bishop Hort's program for that time.
Well, Bishop, we thank both of you for your tremendous service to the church. We have just returned from a general conference, quite an exhilarating general conference, to say the least. So many moments, experiences, and highlights. The word on the street is that if you want a bishop to close out the last session of the general conference, you call on Bishop Othel Hawthorne Lakey, and you'll get it done in record time. One of the highlights, I think for me personally, of the general conference, there were two among many, was a letter that Bishop Reddick read to the general conference from you, Bishop Gilmore. And I have the letter, a copy of it, and signed by you. And I just want to share a couple of things in the letter. You said, as you greeted Bishop Reddick, you said that you're 91 years of age and you attended your first general conference in 1962 as a visitor at Lane Tabernacle, CME, St. Louis, Missouri. The Reverend Othel H. Lakey traveled with me back to Chicago and preached at Great Temple, where I was privileged to pastor. Bishop Lakey was visibly moved by that statement. I saw it, I witnessed it, I looked at him as the letter was being read. And then you went on to say that on the day the conference closed, the Lord says the same. Yvonne and I will celebrate our 64th wedding anniversary. Well, that was a beautiful moment for the conference. But on the day of the election of bishops, unbeknownst to, I guess, the delegation, maybe the College of Bishops may have known, you dialed in and they arranged for you to offer a prayer to the general conference. And I will say this, and I'll stand by it, that prayer that you shared shifted the atmosphere of the conference. It was so beautiful. You could hear a pin drop in the room. And I am so honored and blessed to hold the actual manuscript of that prayer that Bishop Gilmore sent me. Thank you, Joan. I appreciate you. Sent me. And so, Bishop Gilmore, tell us about this prayer. Were you asked to offer the prayer? And just kind of give us a little bit about the inspiration for the words that you penned on paper that I am so blessed to hold in my hands.
Yes, I was asked by the senior bishop. He called me and asked me if I would offer the prayer. And I remember that traditionally, someone has been chosen to pray before the election of bishops. And I've been a bishop long enough to get some perspectives on how I feel about the office. And when I was trying to draft the prayer, I thought of the history of our church and also the atmosphere of a general conference when you're going to have an election. So I wanted to really tap into both. And I tried to remember some of the bishops I've served under, because when I was in Dayton, I served under, I think, 4 or 5 bishops. During the time, it was 18 years I served there. And I was under quite a number of bishops for different reasons, because they were sent to other areas. And so I really wanted to try to, if I can use the word, spiritualize the prayer more than anything else. It's been amazing how many people have called me and sent me texts about the prayer. Bishop Lakey and I discussed it after the General Conference. Just as you mentioned about him closing out, we discussed that day, because I thought about how Bishop Johnson closed out the General Conference in 1974 in Philadelphia. And somebody asked if there was a quorum. I remember what Bishop Johnson ruled that morning. He said we began with one, and so that's sufficient for us to end with one. He didn't answer the question about whether it was a quorum or not. He just ruled that because we started with a quorum, that was sufficient for the entire General Conference. Nobody questioned it. And they passed the budget that Sunday morning. So it was very interesting. I have some feelings about this time in my life in the church, and I wanted to make the prayer as meaningful as I could because of that. Because, as I always tell people, I have less time left than I have lived, and so I don't even worry about that. But I try to just do the best I can at this point in my life.
Well, Bishop Gilmore, thank you so much for this.
May I comment on that?
Yes, please, Bishop Lakey.
Sitting there on the platform as we were preparing to elect bishops, I was concerned that there didn't seem to be at that time, the spirituality that I thought should obtain when we were going into the important task of electing the next leaders of the church. And when Bishop Gilmore offered his prayer, as you rightly said, Dr. Mason, the entire atmosphere of the General Conference changed. And for me, it became what we really ought to mean when we say General Conference electing bishops. It was at that moment, I think, that we shifted from a political organization to a spiritual community. And I really felt the presence of God among us after Bishop Gilmore offered his most meaningful prayer. When we say prayer changes things, I think this was evidence that this was one prayer that changed some things.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And speaking of changing things, let's go back now to 1982. Well, I don't know whether we need to go back to 1978. I'm gonna let y'all determine that. Between 78 and 82, there were a number of things going on in the church. The deaths of a number of bishops. And as I've read in your history book a number of times, Bishop, there was this need to establish a call general conference. I'm gonna let you give the correct understanding of that and how it came to be. There was some legal jargon, some petitions made, etc., all to get us to a general conference so that you all could be elected. And then, of course, Bishop Gilmore, I believe that you were an aspirant for bishop in 78. And so I think, according to the author of the history of the CME Church, you were highly favored for this next go round. But both of you, just sort of take us back between 78 and 82 in anticipation of getting ready for this general conference. You were the editor, of course, of the Christian Index. And Bishop Gilmore, you were pastor. And so would you just kind of give us your recollections of that period? Either one of you can jump in.
Well, I like for Bishop Gilmore to go first because he was living through it. And I was later on writing about it. I'd like to hear how he felt about it before I comment.
Well, going up to the 78 General Conference, my support really was coming from two sources. I understood it, because the third source asked me to drive him from the hotel in Cincinnati to the airport and bring nobody with you. So I drove the bishop to the airport, and he was to retire to 78 General Conference, and he reminded me that he was going to seek to be recalled. So I figured at that point, my support from him was going to be minimal at best. But Bishop Johnson and Bishop Curry were supporting me at the time. And I also had a situation at home. The daughter who's been helping you, Joan, told me, Dad, if you get elected, I ain't moving. So here I am with my young daughter, says she's gonna stay in Dayton and finish high school. I felt pretty good going to that general conference. My presiding elder had assured me that I wouldn't get elected in that general conference, and I didn't. But I felt pretty good going in. You know, I've never run against other candidates. I was seeking the office, and I was going to do what I could to achieve it. So I felt good. I think my own bishop at the time, when Bishop Cummins came that time, but Bishop Shire was my bishop going up to that general conference. But he was doing the best he could as a retired bishop. And there was several candidates from my district. So I decided to just do the best I could in making it into the episcopacy. And I felt okay. I tell you the truth, after the general conference was over, some members of Phillips Temple came to me and said, "We're glad you didn't get elected." And one of them told me, he said, "You know, so we owe, I think, like $20,000 on the church that we'd built." And he said, "You've already raised the money and it's here. But if you leave, some preacher's gonna come and pay that money off with money you've written, note off with money you've raised, and get the credit for it, and you'll be left with nothing. So I'm glad you didn't get elected too." So that was the atmosphere I had. And if you want to know my honest feeling, I really didn't care whether I was elected or not.
Really?
No, I didn't care. Because I had run in 1974. My bishop told me to run, which I thought was a crime. I was like in my mid-40s, I think, at the time. And I went on and did it because he demanded I do it. Some of the bishops chastised me in private after that, and I told them why I did it. And they told me, "Well, we understand now, but we were disappointed when we saw your name on that ballot."
Oh, wow.
So I felt all right about it, you know.
Yeah.
Now, 82, I'll let Bishop Lakey go ahead now.
But before we get to 82, Bishop Gilmore, Bishop Lakey, we talk about politics and spirituality. Talk about what was going on in the church between
Yeah.
78 and 82. And I know that would be a 5-hour exposition on that, but just briefly,
Yeah.
what was happening in the church that prompted us to move to this call general conference?
Bishop Gilmore and I had a classmate named Weldon Crowley from Texas. Remember him, Marshall? And when you met him in the morning, you say, "How you doing, Weldon?" He say, "How much time you got?" So, so when you ask what was going on in '78, how much time you got, because it was some good times in the church. It really the formation of it, the impetus, I should say, started in '74, when it became evident after that election that the time was coming when the younger bishops would be elected. And those in four were Marshall Gilmore, Richard Bass, James Cummings, and I was behind them. I was not in that group. And so that was the impetus going into '78. And to my surprise, Marshall Gilmore really was he won't agree with this, he was the popular favorite, not the political favorite, but the popular favorite, because everybody knew and really appreciated the work of Marshall Gilmore. But the politics were not quite there. And I think partially because, as he indicated, Bishop Henry C. Bunton was seeking to be recalled or to be keep being bishop. And so he was not a political player. But given that background, it was clear that the Joe Johnson, the Chester Kirkendall wings of the church were in competition. And the Bishop Kirkendall, I should say Lane College wing, was supporting James Cummings. And that was one side. The other, the Joe Johnson wing, was supporting Marshall Gilmore and Richard Bass. When we got to the General Conference, it became evident that the 4th District was 100% behind Marshall Gilmore, but was a little hesitant on Richard Bass. It also became evident that the Kirkendall wing was 100% behind James Cummings, and that the Georgia contingent, your good Georgians, Dr. Mason, were with their favorite son, Nathaniel Lindsay. Well, Bishop Joseph C. Coles was not a political, and he bragged about not being politically oriented. He was opposed to Nathaniel Lindsay, and I think I can say this now that both have gone on to glory. He was not in favor of Bishop Lindsay, so he would not support Bishop Lindsay for the Georgians. Well, as you know, Georgians, even if they don't like you, if you're from Georgia, they want to support you. And the leadership of Georgia was supporting Nathaniel Lindsay and Marshall Gilmore. When we got to the General Conference, it became evident that Richard Bass was not going to be able to get the votes, that Marshall Gilmore was going to be a favorite, and James Cummings. But when the issue came to a head, Bishop Coles would not support Bishop Cummings. And so Bishop Johnson then decided to try to elect Marshall Gilmore to support Nathaniel Lindsay. What that did politically was it put all of the support from the Bishop Johnson had behind Nathaniel Lindsay, but it did not pick up any support for Bishop Gilmore. And so that meant that because of that situation, Bishop Lindsay outpolled Marshall Gilmore, and he also, and James Cummings, had enough support to get elected. But as Bishop Gilmore and I discussed after it was over, we kind of believe that God was in that one, because it worked out that his not being elected resounded to Bishop Gilmore's, I think, benefit, and frankly and honestly, I think to the benefit of the church. I think had Marshall Gilmore gotten elected in 78, there would have been an entirely new dynamic in the church. And what came to be in 82, a very forceful change in the direction of the church might not have happened. So, and then of course, we know what happened after 78 was when, that was when I was getting ready to try to offer myself. And of course, Bishop Gilmore was going to go in as the leading candidate. And then of course, William H. Graves was in the wings. Lo and behold, and this will come up when we talk about 82, Bishop Curry died, and then Bishop Johnson died. And well, then a whole new dynamic was in play.
Wow, that's a lot to happen. Yeah, in that period of time. So leading up to 82, Bishop, both of you, what was the issue regarding the General Conference and the need? Was it? I think I read that the bishops had not called a General Conference, the official call. Can you provide some clarity to what happened and why they had to wait till they got to the General Conference? They had to use delegates from 7 to 8, and then approve the new delegates. I mean, what was really going on, Bishop Lakey and Bishop Gilmore?
I'm gonna let Bishop Lakey handle that one because I remember it, but I don't remember the details of it.
Yeah.
Well, Jan Charles Thomas, once he was secretary of the General Conference, and got a big uproar. And the chair said, "Mr. Chairman, where are we?" And Jan Charles Thomas said, "Mr. Chairman, we're in a mess." So leading up to that 82 General Conference, we were in a mess. What actually happened was the 78 General Conference said that the General Conference would be set between June 15th and I think July 15th. That was when the General Conference said the General Conference was to be set. Heretofore, it had been set the second week in May or something like that. Well, the bishops set the date of the General Conference for May rather than June as the discipline stipulated. So when they elected delegates for the May meeting to meet in May, well, when they got to the General Conference, it could not be held as a General Conference because the discipline said it had to be in June. And so the only way they could make it legal was to make it a called General Conference. So the General Conference called to order as a called General Conference.
So wait a minute, Bishop Lakey. The last time we had a call conference was in 1873?
There you go. It's the only time we'd had a called General Conference. So right. The 82 General Conference began as a called General Conference because the bishops did not use the correct date. And the only way they could have made it legal in May was to make it a called General Conference. Mm-hmm. So this was from legal advice. Leonard V. Brady was the attorney. So when we got there, it was a called General Conference, and they had to call the roll of the previous General Conference as a called General Conference to make it legal. And then when it was a legal General Conference as a called General Conference, then the General Conference legally voted that it would become the 82 General Conference. And those of us who would have challenged that were delegates, or were candidates. So we kept our mouths shut.
So you have to keep your mouth closed.
Keep our mouth closed. Because I remember the time when a Marshall Gilmore and Oprah Lake and a whole bunch of guys would have been on the floor challenging that authority, but we let it go because we wanted to elect the bishop. But that was really what happened. So the motion was that the general conference that was called would become the regular general conference and seat the delegates who had been elected for that general conference. In a nutshell, that's how I read it. That way you read it, Bishop Gilmore?
I did, yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Well, wow, that's a lot. That gave me a headache just thinking about you having to do all of that just to call the conference into the session. So let's talk about now with social media and other things, candidates are able to get out in a way unlike any that we probably seen or witnessed. What was it like for you all? I mean, were you, and I know you don't use the term campaigning, you're an aspirant, you know, and I know, and Bishop Lakey has written a number of articles I read in some old Christian indexes about the election of the episcopacy, the sacredness of it, and other bishops as well. But Bishop Gilmore, what were you doing? Did you campaign? Did you send out letters, flyers? Did you shake hands and kiss the babies? I mean, what was it like in '82? You know, we know they knew you, but did you have to campaign, if you will, for lack of a better term, to get yourself out?
Well, my whole candidacy changed in '82. I got more telephone calls from across the church, from retired preachers, a lot of them who were also delegates going to '82. But I campaigned. Most of mine was through correspondence, letters. Members of my congregation who was annual conference officers sent letters out to the delegates on my behalf. The lay leader was a member, Orrin West, the missionary president, Bess Habana, and they sent letters to delegates supporting my campaign, and my candidacy, I should say. And so I did not do a lot of traveling because I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, so I had to do the best I could with what I had. Now, the city of Dayton, and I have a magazine here with an article in it. I just found it a few weeks ago, where they did a banquet for me at the convention center. And back in '82, I think they cleared around $6,000 or $7,000 and gave it to the treasurer of the campaign organization. And when I got elected, I had about 4,000 or 5,000 of the 6 that was cleared, because I didn't do a lot of traveling. I drove most of the places I went. I flew to Oklahoma, I remember, and Texas and Louisiana. But by and large, I did not do a lot of traveling because I simply couldn't afford it. And my bishop going up to '82 had been, first of all, Bishop Blake, I mentioned him. And Bishop James Cummins came after the '78 General Conference. And he was a very good supporter of mine. When we had the banquet, he was in California, but he came back and was the speaker for it and supported me through my election. He stayed in contact with me almost every week. And when Bishop Cummins spoke on my behalf in places, it meant a lot. But I, like Bishop Lakey mentioned, Bishop Coles, I never considered myself a very good politician in the church. I had to kind of depend on other people. And Bishop Lakey knows I had a strong detractor in my own conference. And he raised money to keep me from getting elected.
Oh, my.
And every year when we had the annual conference, he'd have a big dinner for a bunch of the delegates.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I did get elected in '82, and Bishop Cummins was my bishop, our bishop, we met at Trinity in Indianapolis, our first meeting. And I was going down to the lower level of the church that morning and met this gentleman, and he bragged about giving some of the candidates in 78 $1,000. And he asked me to, he says, will you speak to the old man and tell him I want to be on the joint board? I said, you didn't give me $1,000, so ask that bishop you gave. I said, ask him. So Bishop come and spent about 40 minutes talking about me down in the low level of that church that morning.
Yeah.
Because both of us had served our young years in some way under Bishop Bell. And Bishop come and made it clear to them, to that group that morning at Trinity, that we all were sons of Bishop Bell. And we were going to support each other. He made it clear he was going to support me. But this preacher spent so much money trying to keep me off the delegation.
And that's something.
But Bishop Lakey came to be his bishop later. I won't talk to that. Speak to that.
Yeah. Bishop Gilmore's in keeping with his personality is unduly modest. I see his election a little differently. I see Marshall Gilmore having secured his place when we all gathered in the early 70s at the new church in Dayton that Marshall Gilmore had built. And I think it was decided when all the bishops and all of us walked into the new Phillips Temple in Dayton, that Marshall Gilmore was really elected bishop then. It was just a matter of waiting until time for the votes to be cast. I know he did his campaigning his way, but it was an odds-on known fact that in '82, Marshall Gilmore was going to be elected bishop. The issue was who were going to be at that time the other three, because we all knew Marshall Gilmore was going to be elected. So the question was, he going to be Graves, Lakey, Bass, Broomfield, or Isom? Those were the questions being raised. There was no question about Marshall Gilmore. And his, quote, campaigning, such as he did, was for folks to get to see and know this Marshall Gilmore, who had done such a great work in the church. So that's how I saw him going into. And another thing Bishop Gilmore did that I thought put him in the best favors. And in 1970, we were in, what was it, Mount Olive Cathedral in Memphis, when Bishop Bertram W. Doyle was up for retirement. And Marshall Gilmore got on the floor and was arguing that Bishop B.W. Doyle should not be retired, he should be retained. And after he made his speech, a whole lot of Bishop Gilmore's friends went to him and said, you made a political mistake. A person like Amos Rice, who had fought hard for the retirement law, said this was a mistake for Marshall Gilmore to defend Bishop Doyle. But the upshot of it was, and this was his positive, that Marshall Gilmore showed loyalty to his bishop, even to the possible peril of his own Episcopal aspirations. But wow. It was his willingness, his courage to defend his bishop in that situation that endeared him into the hearts and minds of a lot of us. So that really helped Marshall Gilmore. And then too, what we may want to, and you can't take things out of their historical context. Mm-hmm. Historical context was that, remember now that at that time, those of us with top-notch theological education were a rarity. And at that time, a degree, see, when we were in school, There was no IT. There was no Phillips School of Theology that was accredited. And those of us who were blessed by the church to attend the major theological schools were put in a higher category in the church, because the church at that time needed first-class theologically trained leaders. And so those of us who were able to go to Drew and to Boston and to Iliff and to Howard, those had an advantage because the church really was searching, because we had to compete with these other denominations, and their leaders were highly trained theologically, and the CME Church wanted to be sure that its leadership could measure up to the academic leadership of the other denominations. So the fact that most of us had gone to these theological schools at that time was a tremendous advantage.
Well, I want you in a few minutes, both you and Bishop Gilmore, to talk about how you met, because it was in that setting that you all met each other in seminary. But I want to hear your story, Bishop Lakey. You described in the history book that you wrote yourself as a dark horse candidate, quote unquote. And I've heard others say that Bishop Lakey, when he was editor to the Christian Index, he wrote himself into the episcopacy based on just the level of the articles, some controversial, some on point, but all intriguing, to say the least. So you consider yourself an underdog, or maybe not an underdog, maybe a dark horse candidate. But why so? And was your bishop supporting you? And I guess the larger question: can you run for bishop in this church? And I guess you can, and not have your Episcopal leaders support you and hope to get elected.
Well, here's the way it was. It was no secret that I was a protege of Norris Samuel Curry. And it was understood, I think, by all that had Norris Curry lived, that I would be right into the episcopacy on his coattails. I think that was generally understood. But so when I was elected editor, I followed the tradition of editors up to that point, where I considered the editorship to be a platform to speak what I felt to be truth to power. Mm-hmm. Whatever I felt I wanted to say to the church, I felt that was my job to say it. And so I wrote what I felt. And in fact, I was praised on one side and condemned on the other for things I said. In fact, Bishop Murchison pulled me aside once and said, Lakey, you ought to stop writing all that stuff you write. You ought not to do that for the church. That's bad for the church. Well, you don't argue with bishops. So what I did was went and got some of Bishop Murchison's articles when he was editor and printed some of his articles, which were worse than mine. And after that, Bishop Murchison didn't have anything else to say to me. Because up to that point, editors did what I was doing. Okay. So that was what I was doing. But also, as editor, you get to know the church. You go to most of the annual conferences, you shake hands with everybody. So I got to know everyone. But what happened politically while I was the dark horse, that was your question, was that Norris Curry died. And of course, that was my mentor. Well, at the grave in Los Angeles, at his graveside, as we were getting ready to leave his grave, Bishop Johnson came up to me, put his arms around me and said, Lakey, you're my boy now. And that made me feel, well, I have a supporter. Lo and behold, 3 months later, Bishop Johnson died.
Oh my goodness.
So I had no visible Episcopal support. But it so happened that the legacy of Norris Curry and the legacy of Joe Johnson was strong enough so that when the time came in 82, I had enough momentum that I was able to maintain the support they had given me. It so happened that the bishop I was under at the time was in a different political camp, so to speak. And I don't hold it against him because that was where the church was. And so he was not supportive of me. But it so happened that I was able to counter that, because when you get to know people, and this is the advantage of being editor. See, I wasn't like Bishop Gilmore and Bishop Graves and Bishop Isom, and they won't admit it, but they could invite bishops to preach in their churches and they'd give them honorariums and stuff. All I had was the Christian Index. And, it doesn't hurt to put the bishop's picture on the front cover and, that little stuff like that. So I did use the index a little bit. My motto was, or my feeling was, for the first 70, 82, the first 2 years I wrote for the church. Don't tell anybody, Dr. Mason. The last 2 years I wrote for me. If I can make that, since I'm 86 years old, I can make that confession now.
You can make that confession now.
That I thought, so you would do things. If a strong leader of a denomination of a district wrote an article, good or bad, you put it in the Christian Index. That kind of thing.
Right. Wow. Joan, you can unmute your dad. I had to unmute Bishop. We were getting a little feedback from the computer, but she can unmute you, Bishop Gilmore, because I want to ask both you and Bishop Lakey. Let me send her a quick text. Okay. I want to ask both you and Bishop Lakey. Now I want to talk about the day that you all were elected. And I think you all were elected on different days. If I read correctly, the first ballot going into the wee hours of the morning. I think there may have been some drama because Bishop Lakey, your name was omitted from the first ballot. Who on earth would do that? What was that all about? And then getting elected. Bishop Gilmore, ask Joan to come and unmute you, please, so you can chime in. I just sent her a text. But Bishop Lakey, while he's getting Joan, what do you remember about that first ballot? Let me back up for a second, because I understand that for the first time in history, you all were able to present yourself or introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, see, this is why it was so historic. For the first time, we had a printed ballot for the election of bishops. And for the first time, candidates or aspirants were able to present themselves or introduce themselves to the General Conference. So the 82 General Conference was historic in that sense. And so we had to, at a certain point, go write our names, put our names in to be on the printed ballot. Mm-hmm. That was back in the days of the mimeograph machine.
Right.
And they had to cut a stencil. So we had to sign in so they could put our names the way we wanted on the printed ballot.
Right.
So that was the process. So we all went up, signed in, and then they went back and printed the ballot. And then when time came for the election, they were ready to pass out the ballots. Mm-hmm. And so what happened, the process was, we all went up front, and the secretary was reading the ballot, was calling the names of those on the ballot. And when your name was called, you bowed, you didn't say anything, you just waved your hand or you bowed and then went to your seat. Well, he went down the line, and the name ahead of me, I think, was Jones. And the next name would have been me, and then Anzo Montgomery. And when the secretary said Jones, and I think Kelsey Jones bowed and went to his seat. And then he said Anzo Montgomery. And Montgomery bowed and went to his seat. And then the secretary said, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Lakey's name has been left off the ballot.
Mm.
And Lord have mercy.
I'm sure there was a hush in that room, huh?
Yeah, there was a hush in the room, and I think it was a hush in my heart too. Yeah, it was. And so then he called my name, and then I took my bow and went to my seat. And then they finished the roll call.
Yes.
And then the chair, Bishop Exum, was presiding. The chair asked me, did I want them to write my name or did I want a new ballot? He asked me.
Okay.
And that was on the spur of the moment. That was a difficult decision. On the one hand, I realized the delegation was ready to vote. And I didn't want to be responsible for holding up the vote. On the other hand, emotionally, folk would write my name in the first time, but I was sure that they would not be writing my name in other time.
Mm-hmm.
So I, on the spur of the moment, made the decision, Mr. Chairman, I would like for my name to be on the ballot, the same as the other person.
Yes.
And that was the decision they made.
Wow. Bishop Gilmore, so, and Bishop Lakey, you've alluded to it. So this was the days where they counted each ballot one sheet at a time.
One ballot at
a time. I guess they had tellers at that time, they were called.
Tellers? Uh-huh.
Yeah. That was a long process.
Very long process, but an exciting process. But
I can imagine.
You say Lakey won, Gilmore won, Graves too. That was a tremendous experience.
So Bishop Gilmore, you get the number of votes. What happens then? Were they lifting you up eventually and carrying you to the stage? You know, did all of that? Because I can't find any photos of it. I mean, you would think this was in the 1800s. This was just in 1982. So I don't know why I can't find any photos of that. But did they lift you all up and carry you to the stage as they do now?
Right. There were people gathering around me.
Okay.
When they saw that I was drawing near. Because in that general conference, I got 75% of the vote. And so they saw I had a momentum going and they began to come around me. And when I got the number of votes, they picked me up, carried me up on the stage. And interestingly enough to me, it was the day before John's birthday. As Bishop Lakey said, it was in May, and it was on the 8th of May, and when I was elected.
Wow, that is something. Bishop Lakey, your moment when you finally get past the number.
In fact, I wish I had known. I have a copy of somebody had a copy of me being lifted up. So I could have
sent that to me. I can still add it.
Okay. But what happened was Bishop Gilmore and Bishop Graves were elected around about almost midnight, Bishop Gilmore?
Almost midnight, yeah.
Almost midnight. Well, when they finished the balloting and those two were elected and they'd given all the accolades, I was 44 votes short.
Wow.
And at the time, I wanted them to have another election because I had learned a long time ago that once you dismiss, bishops get together and, well, you don't know what's going to happen after that. So I wanted them to have another ballot, but it was too late. So they had to dismiss, and I had to go to bed 44 votes short. I thought that was bad until I talked to Bishop Gilmore. He said in 78, he was a few votes short. And he had to spend 4 years. I had to spend overnight.
Yeah, I was 22 votes short.
You were 20.
Are you kidding? 22?
In 78, yes.
He was 22 votes. He had to wait 4 years. And I was 44 votes short and I had to wait overnight. But anyway, that was how I felt. And I didn't know I was elected bishop on John's birthday because the next day was Mother's Day.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, and it was something really to go to bed And you know, I didn't get much sleep. And then to wake up, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but the phone rang in our room at 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And the wife of one of our delegates, my good friends in Texas, spoke to Narcissus and said, honey, I hate to tell you this, but Bishop's wife been on the phone all night long telling folk not to vote for your husband. So that was the first news I got.
Oh my goodness.
At 6 o'clock that morning, you know, that was kind of rough. So we went on to the place, and it was Mother's Day. And we had to go to the Mother's Day service, and Bishop Coles was scheduled to preach. And the service, the business session didn't start until after lunch that afternoon.
Right. And then they resumed. What was the momentum kind of taken? You know, when you carry it over to another day, is the excitement, does it resume once the ballots is counting? You know,
well, I felt that, I don't know how Bishop Gilmore felt, because I know he was in second heaven then, because he was bishop.
He had been elected, right?
He's been up on the stage and stuff, and he down there trying to get elected. And I felt that the momentum picked back up.
Good.
But during the night, some politics had been played, and some efforts were being made, I learned later, to block my election. Yeah. And so when it started again, because when it ended, if I remember correctly, it was Lakey, Broomfield, and Bass, and Isom. That was the order in which we closed out. So when we resumed, it became apparent that the forces that had lined up behind Bishop Isom and Bishop Broomfield. And I think eventually Bishop Bass, and my name was not supposed to be called. And so when the balloting started, it became a sort of between Bishop Isom and myself, and Bishop Isom prevailed ahead of me. Mm-hmm. And here I'm wondering, are they going to run short? And this is how things work, Dr. Mason. I was sitting there as they were giving Bishop Isom his accolades. I was sitting there wondering, do they have enough votes left for me to get elected? Right. And I remember, I think Darrell Coleman was helping count the ballots. Okay. And while they were doing Bishop Isom, he looked through the remaining ballots and came to me and said, Dr. Lakey, you have enough votes to get elected. So when they resumed the counting, though I was still anxious, I had been told I had enough votes to get elected. Yeah. And when I got elected, when I got the numbers, they gathered around me. Ed Stone was sitting next to me. He said, Lake, we carrying you up in your chair. So he picked up Bishop Gilmore, and they picked him up bodily. My crowd picked me up in my chair.
In a chair?
In the chair. And they carried me up. I'm sitting in my chair. And I shouldn't say this on your program, but somebody said, I heard them say, that Negro carrying his throne with him. And so that's how I was carried to the platform. Oh, wow. And this is the irony of it. Bishop Kirkendall and Bishop Coleman, this is our system, were the first bishops to greet me when I was taken to the stage. So that's our system. Wow.
That's special. Well, I mean, this class obviously, once elected, gained notoriety. There were 5 of you all, and you all went on to lead your Episcopal districts and to make your mark. 3 of your classmates are no longer with us, but their spirit and legacy continues to live on. You've seen a lot in the church over the last 40 years, and what a blessing that in 2022 that you are able to share those memories and also to be a part of the changing dynamics of the church. I would like to ask you by some closing thoughts. about what have you seen throughout these 40 years, and how do you feel? And this is maybe a loaded question, but are you pleased with the direction that the church is going? I mean, you look at it, from a different lens than most of us. Bishop Gilmore, let's start with you. Just give us your thoughts about the church and what you've seen and where it's going, and then you, Bishop Lakey.
I think the world has changed so tremendously since we were elected. It's much faster. I think social media has done a lot. I see a lot of things being done now that I really didn't have the opportunity to do it. It's not simple in a sense, but when there are deaths in our church, you know it right immediately. We had to do it on telephone, that letter. One of the things I think has happened too, I think when we were elected in 82, most of us had worked very closely with bishops. And so there was a continuity in a way in what we were attempting to do from time to time that I'm not sure that continues. We had been kind of in the know, so to speak, of what was going on in the church, and that helped a lot. But one of the things I also noticed in the last General Conference, when I got the list of delegates in the book, I knew so few of them, but I've been retired 16 years. That's a long time. And I didn't know a lot of the people that I saw in the delegation from the districts I presided over, which was the 4th and the 8th. And yet I feel pretty good about where the church is going, because I think the church has always been impacted by what's happening in the world. And I think we were looked upon as a dream team when we were elected, and we had some projects. Bishop Lakey got the hymnal that the church has, and I think was a major step in our church. And I thought that was a very good move on the part of the church. I hate to say this, but one of the things we discovered later, that the hymnals hadn't been paid for. Mm. And that wasn't the people's fault. It was the leaders' fault. They appointed me to collect the money to pay. I found that the publishing house that did it wasn't owned by the National Baptist Convention. They gave me a name to call, and he turned out to be a white fella.
Oh, my.
And I told him what my job was, and he greeted me with it and was appreciative. And the bishops paid for the hymn. I think it was $143,000 that they sent to me, which I sent to him to pay for the hymnals. Mm-hmm. But he had led in that project, which wasn't easy because of copyrights and all that kind of thing. And I felt very good that we were able to, I think, provide the church with some things. I decided to do the book of ritual. Mm-hmm. And the bishops got behind that. And so did William George when he was General Secretary of publications in the church. He provided a large one and got all the copyrights, I think, that we use in there, because most of that, what I did was edit, not write. Mm-hmm. And he did a tremendous job, George did, in getting that. So I thought, and then Bishop Graves led in getting the headquarters in Memphis. I was very happy when he called me about that. And we went and looked at it, and he moved forward with it. I felt good about the church then. I feel good about it now. I think I worry more about what has happened since the pandemic. Are we going to really get back in our churches the way we were before? Mm-hmm. Only time will tell that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I have no real regrets about what's happening, nor what we did. I think our leaders did a good job. The bishops who were elected in 82, I think they all did a very excellent job. Because the thing I found when I got elected bishop, I told this many times to people, when I was a pastor, I felt I could solve my problems. With a bishop, I didn't. I had a presiding elder one time, W.C. Crenshaw was his name, and he used to say, the thing you have to learn to do in the church is hold your nose and keep on going, or you get stinky sometimes. And I found that to be true in the church. And when as a bishop, you find you just can't do some of the things you want to do, because you have to have the people with you. And sometimes they don't see it as you see it. Bishop Allen used to say, J. Claude Allen, who really did more for me than I know anybody. But Bishop Allen used to say, if you can see more from where you are than I can see from up here, then you ought to be up here and ought to be down there. But you can see it, it means you can do it. And a lot of things that you want to do in the church as a bishop, you just have to bide the time.
Yeah.
You can pray that you can get it done.
Get it done. Before we get to Bishop Lakey, tell us about your friendship with Bishop Lakey. Y'all known each other long.
Well, I won't repeat something my wife said about that. But we met before day in the morning with the Heartbound on.
That's Heartbound, yes.
I'd gotten there and I was unloading my things out of my little old car. I had a 1949 Ford. Back in those days that I bought when I was, my brother bought it. And then he bought a second car and gave me the first one. And I paid him some money on that. But I was making a trip into the dorm. And Bishop Lakey, I believe, was coming out. And I was going in. Or was it just the opposite?
The opposite.
I was
coming out,
and he was going in the door, and we met in the door.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock in the morning. I'd driven up there from, I started in Augusta, Georgia, because I was pastoring that summer, filling in for one of the pastors who's gone on now. But anyway, we greeted each other and discovered right off, and he knows it better than I do it now, that we were both CMEs. And during those 3 years we were there, I think we were only CMEs in the seminary. Yeah. But I'll let you tell him because he knows that still. My wife, she can't hear you now, Bishop.
Yeah. Well, what Bishop Gilmore is referring to is Yvonne says she's heard this story so many times. If she hears it again, she can pull her dress tail up over her head. That's what she said. So we don't tell it in front of her anymore. But what he's saying is true. I had traveled all the way from Pasco, Washington to California by conference to Madison, New Jersey, and arrived at the train station, and a couple on campus carried me to the dorm. And when I got to the door opened, and there's this young man standing there getting ready to come out. I said, hello, I'm Othel Lakey from CME from California. He said, oh, I'm Marshall Gilmore, a CME from Hoffman, North Carolina. So we met, and I don't know why we mentioned we were CME at 2 o'clock in the morning meeting. We've been friends ever since. And Marshall, Bishop Gilmore, was really almost like an older brother. Now, I had an older brother who was 6 years older than me, but because I was a young preacher, he didn't treat me like an older brother. He treated me like a preacher. So he didn't carry me to the clubs. He didn't tell me about girls. What older brothers tell young brothers.
Right.
He told my brother Lawrence all that stuff. He wouldn't tell me anything. So Marshall kind of helped me learn the ropes a little bit as an older brother as we moved through the church. but everything he said was, of course, accurate. About that hymnal, what happened was when they gave us our assignments as bishops over committees, boards, they didn't give me a board. They made me vice chair of the board of Christian education under Bishop Cummings. When Bishop Cummings died, I became chair of the board of Christian education, but Bishop Cummings was also chair of the hymnal commission. So I inherited that responsibility. And I looked through what Bishop Cummings had done for the hymnal, went to the General Conference and reported that we didn't have the resources to do a hymnal. And the General Conference ordered that we do the hymnal anyway. So that's how we wound up doing it the way we did it. And what Bishop Gilmore said was so true. The church agreed, the bishop agreed, we would print 25,000 at $10 each to pay for it. But somehow the payment didn't get made. We sold them and got the money. And well, we had some problems, but we couldn't do what we wanted to do because of one of those things. But all that we tried to do. And by the way, that Dream Team name, you know where that came from?
Where did it come from?
It came in the 125th anniversary, 1995 it was. It was during the O.J. Simpson trial. We had the celebration, and they had a lady doing something about the church, and she was going through the history. When she got to our class, she said, and then we elected the Dream Team. So she equated that's where we got the name from, our class with the Johnny Cochran law firm. That's where that Dream Team came from. She labeled us with that. We never called ourselves that.
We didn't do it.
That right, Mark?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's good. That's a great anecdote and story. I often wonder where that name came from.
That's where the name came from.
Yeah. Well, lastly, we elected, ironically, 5 new bishops. That number 5 again, just a few months ago, and now they are serving and leading their Episcopal districts. And I know perhaps you all look back now and in your mind, you have some idea of what they're going through, and do you offer advice to new bishops if they ask?
Well, only if they ask.
Yeah. Yep.
You don't volunteer advice to bishop. You have
right.
I don't know how Bishop Gilmore feels, but I felt very comfortable for the church with the class of 22. The kinship I see is that the 22 class as the 82 class were all primarily pastors.
Mm-hmm.
That is, when I say that, I mean pastors together, which provides a relationship and a kinship that's meaningful for the church. They all really look at it pretty much from the same perspective. And I think that helped us a little bit as we move forward. We all knew what the church really needed from a pastoral point of view.
And we were all friends.
And all friends.
I was very happy with the class of 2022. I was very pleased. And I had 2 of them to call me, and one of them to speak to me after he finished visiting the conference after his election.
Oh, wow.
But I really feel good about that class. And sometimes you may want to see somebody else elected, but that doesn't mean that you don't like the ones who were elected. And that's the way I was about this class. Yeah. I thought all 5 of them, I don't know one of them that well. I read the letter that Bishop Reddick wrote about him later, and he looked like a very able person to help the church also. But I felt very good about this class.
Yeah.
Well, that is great. Bishop Lakey and Bishop Gilmore, you all are just our Episcopal jewels, treasures in this church. We thank God for your longevity. We thank God for the contributions that you have made, not only in leading your Episcopal district, but as authors and scholars, the books that you have written, the articles that you have written. And this church is the better because of the two of you. And we thank God for your longevity of friendships as well. And I thank you for spending some time with me on this afternoon, on this conversation as we look back years on this dream team, the class of '82, with Bishop Lakey and Bishop Marshall Gilmore. And we certainly say the names of Bishop William Graves, Bishop Dotsy Isom, and Bishop Ori Broomfield as well, members of the dynamic Episcopal Class of 1982. Thank God for you. May God continue to bless you and your families. And let me thank my dear sister Joan, who has really become a good friend. You'd be surprised sometime during my shows, we're texting each other, particularly when I have some folks who get a little hot-tempered, well, this was during the candidates time we were doing some things, but she has really been a good friend. I'm grateful for her as well. And we thank you so much for the time that you spent with me today. And may God continue to bless.
Well, thank you very, very much. And your member, Dr. Lakey, says she's going to get her tithes and offering to you as soon as she gets your address.
Let me tell you, Dr. Elfrida Lakey is a blessing to West Mitchell Street. Bishop Gilmore, you remember that little church in Atlanta called West Mitchell Street, don't you?
Oh, yeah, I do.
You ought to hear the story about that one. We don't have time to tell it now, but
yeah, well, he shared it with me, okay. And we love him. Even if his tenure was short at West Mitchell Street, he is very much a part of the history and lore there. But thank God for you all. You all take care. And continued blessings to both of you.
Thank you. God
bless. Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wasn't that wonderful? Thank you so much, Bishop Lakey and Bishop Gilmore, for sharing with us today. And I look forward to continuing these conversations. My next conversation will be in September, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you, Dr. Duhart, and the continued support of this wonderful church. As we close out, I want to close out with a brief selection, Draw Me Nearer, by my cousin, Dr. Mordred Roberson, who just completed his PhD in music at Harvard University and is now at Emory. Won't you enjoy this a cappella rendition of Draw Me Nearer? Be blessed, go in love, and go in peace.
I am thine, O Lord, and I've heard thy voice, and it told thy love to me. But I long to rise in the arms of faith and be closer drawn to thee. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to thy precious, it is precious, to thy precious bleeding side.